We continue now at the top of Daf Non Aleph Amud Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 51a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, can something learned from a Kal V'chomer, can it teach through a Mamotzinu? And the Gemara is in the middle of bringing a proof from a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah later on. There's a three-way machlokes Tanoim. Let's say a Kohen does Malika on a bird offering, and then it turns out that that bird is a treifa. So does the Malika, does it purify it from the normal tumah of a nivlas of tahor? Normally the nevela of an oaf, it conveys tumah, that's tumah through the Beis Habliya. And so again, the question is, does it purify or not? Now, the halacha by a regular animal is that shechita does in fact purify a regular animal. And so now Rabbi Meir is in the middle of saying we can make a kal v'chomer from the shechita of an animal to the shechita of the bird. And then we can make a mamotzino from shechita of the bird to a case of malika by a bird offering. As the Gemara now continues, as Rabbi Meir continues, mitaheres treifasa mitumasa. Again, we find by shechita that the shechita is able to be mitar, can purify the bird, and it no longer conveys that tumah. So af malika, so too by a bird offering, when malika is done, shemechasharta ba'achila, where again it renders it fit to be eaten, tatar treifasa mitumasa, it's able to purify it from its tumah. So here you do have an example again of a kal v'chomer followed by a mamotzino. And the Mishnah continues with the third opinion. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, daya kenivlas behema tahora sheshchitasa mitaras. It's enough that a bird should be like a nevela of a behema tahora, where the shechita purifies it, meaning shechita will be able to purify by a bird, let's say, that's not a carbon. However, velo malikasa. However, that's not true by malika. That's not able to purify. Rabbi Yossi makes a distinction between shechita and malika. But the Gemara continues and says, velohi, you can't really bring a proof from this Mishnah, because hasam tahavehi mishchita dechulin ka'asyan, because there, again, the initial kal v'chomer is not coming from a case of kodshim, it's coming from shechita, from slaughtering of a regular animal, and this entire discussion is really revolving only around kodshim. And Rashi explains, hachi garsinan velohi hasam tahavi mishchita dechulin ka'asya v'hachi perusho. The explanation of the Gemara is as follows. Hasam ikar time into Rabbi Meir first. Over there, the real reason of Rabbi Meir lo yalef b'binyanav, he's not learning it from a binyanav, from a mamotzinu. Ela mehekish dezos toras habehema va'of. It's actually from a hekish of behema and oaf, kedelakamon b'perachat oaf, like we'll say later on. Amrinon Rabbi Meir kro eshkach v'dorish. Rabbi Meir found a pasuk and darshaned it. And v'inami tahavid gamar lo b'binyanav. And even if it is being learned through a binyanav, kedekatani v'masnisan, as the Mishnah taught, lo mifsha tabayin, it still would not answer our question. To Rabbi Meir malika b'kachim mishchita dechulin gamar, because Rabbi Meir is learning malika of kachim from shchita of a chulin animal. Havale malame dechulin, so that the one doing the teaching is chulin. Ulaman delesle de Reb Papa, and according to the one who doesn't hold of Reb Papa, afal gav de lomad kodesh lav raya. Even though the thing that's being derived is kodesh, this would not be a raya. And the Gemara continues, davar halamid bebinyanav. Let's say something is derived from a binyanav, again from a mamotzinu. Mahu sheyilamid behekish uv'gzeira shava uv'kal v'chomer bebinyanav. Is it able to teach through hekish, through gzeira shava, through kal v'chomer, or through binyanav? And the Gemara says, pshot mehachada. We could at least answer one of these questions. And the Gemara brings a brisa. The brisa says, mipnei ma amru lon bedam kosher. Why do they say that if the blood is left overnight, it's kosher? We'll see Rashi in a moment. But the brisa continues, shaharei lon be'emurin kosher, because if the emurin, the sacrificial portions, are left overnight, they're kosher. Lon be'emurin kosher. And why is it that if the sacrificial portions are left overnight, we say kosher? Shaharei lon be'basar kosher, because if the meat is left overnight, it's kosher. And yotze, what if it leaves the area of the Beis Hamikdash, leaves the proper area? Hoel v'yotze kosher be'bama, since if it leaves the proper area by a bama, by a private altar, that was kosher in those times. And tameh, what about a situation of tameh? Hoel v'huter ba'avoda sibor. Let's say you have a communal avoda, a communal carbon, a situation where the tzibor is tameh. There we say that the tumah is permitted. And chutz lizmano, what if you have a situation of intention outside of the proper time? Hoel umeratza lepigulo, since by the throwing of the blood it was accepted in terms of making the carbon pigul, so therefore again it's kosher there as well. And chutz lemakoma, what about by an intention outside of the proper place? Hoel v'hukish lechutz lizmano, since it's compared to chutz lizmano, to an intention outside of the proper time. Shekiblu psulin, let's say disqualified individuals receive the blood, v'zarku daman, and let's say they throw the blood. Bahanach psulin dechazul avodas sibor, you have psulin, you have disqualified who are fit to do avodas sibor, again communal avoda. And so in any case, the point from this brisa is all of these are really being learned bebinyanav through mamotzinus. It's mamotzinus from mamotzinus, so it seems to indicate that a binyanav is able to teach through a binyanav. The Gemara asks, "V'chidanin davar shelo behechshero." Now, in terms of these limudim, are we able to learn something which is being done in the improper fashion, midavar shebehechshero, from something that is done in the proper fashion? And we will see Rashi on that as well. And the Gemara says, Tana was Tana mizos Toras ha'ola riba samach le. Actually, the Tana of this brisa is including it, is learning it from the pasuk of Zos Toras ha'ola. And Rashi explains, Pshot meham masnisa chad mehanachbaya. You can answer from this brisa at least one of the questions. And the brisa says, Mipnei ma'amru l'kamonhi beperak hamizbech mekadesh. This is later on in Perak hamizbech mekadesh. L'Rabbi Yehuda didarish zos hi ha'ola. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who darshans the pasuk of zos hi ha'ola, harei elu miyutin. You have exclusions over here. Prat l'nishchita balayla, to exclude if it's slaughtered at night. V'shenishbach dama, if it's blood spilled. V'sheyatza dama chutz lekloim, if it's blood left and went outside of the curtains. Uparach, and the Gemara asks, why is it that these are excluded and the others are rendered fit? Why do we say if the blood is left overnight it's kosher? What it means is, it simply means that if it went up on the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down from the Mizbeach. And the reason is, that's true by the Emurin. If the Emurin are left overnight, and they go up on the Mizbeach, they don't come down. And Rashi continues, V'lon be'emurin lama kasher sh'arei lon be'basar kasher. Why is it that if the emurin, if the sacrificial portions are left overnight, why is that kasher? Because by the meat it's kasher. Gomer min ha-Torah, we learn from the Torah, shezman achilas shlomim shnei yamim. Now here Rashi explains that we're really learning because there is basar which can be left overnight. That's by the shlomim which can be eaten for 2 days. Alma emurin gomri bebinyanav al adam. In any case, you see that emurin are learned through this binyanav from the blood. And tamei evare ola tamei, and that refers to the limbs of the ola that are tamei. Mivnei ma'im ola lo yirdu. Why is it that if they go up on the mizbech, they don't come down? Ho'elu maratzel pigulo, and then the brisa said, since it's accepted as far as pigul is concerned. Ho'el v'chashuva hartzo asdama, meaning since the acceptance of the blood is important enough, l'chayev ola mishum pigul, to render the carbon pigul, and now he's liable for pigul. Kimosha karvu matira v'behechsher, as if the matter was brought properly. L'fikach emuri pigul shalo lo yirdu. That's why the sacrificial portions of pigul that go up on the Mizbeach don't come down. And then Shekiblu Psulin im Zarku Esdamo, again, they're disqualified, they receive the blood, they throw the blood. Mifnei Mayim Olu Hadamo Haimurin Lo Yerdu. Why is it that if the blood goes up or the Imurin go up, it doesn't come down? Bahanach Psulin Machshirim Dechazu Lavoda Sibur. You could have some situations of Psulin that are able to do Avoda Sibur, Kagon Kohen Tameh, like a situation of a Kohen Tameh. And Rashi continues, the Gemara then asked, V'chidanin davar dekayalaft be'imurin shalo be'achsherim minolan be'basar dechshiru bekach. They brought the proof again from basar, which really is allowed in that fashion. That was by the shlamim, which anyways is actually eaten over 2 days. How can you bring a proof from that case to a situation where something is not allowed? V'zuhi mitzvah, so again by the basar that's done in the proper way, in the proper mitzvah. V'su hechi yolaf yotzei be'mikdash miyotzei be'bama. How can you learn a case of yotzei when it leaves the mikdash from a case of yotzei when it leaves by a bama? Shakulo yotzei, with the whole idea of bama is that it's outside the mikdash. She'ein sham kloim ala pnei hasada. There's no curtains, it's just on the field. That was the Gemara's question. And then the Gemara said, Zos Torah sa'ol. Let's learn from the pasuk, Torah achas l'chol ha'olin. What that means is there's one law for everything that goes up on the mizbeach. Im alu lo yerdu. They go up, they don't come down. Kedechsiv al mokdah kol halayla, like it says in the pasuk. V'chol rayos halolu mishum dememayit mizos ha'ola t'losa psulei ma'aseh mehanach. And all of these proofs that are being brought, since Zos ha'ola was an exclusion of the 3 cases of exclusion, so they bring from here, Maish nahani mehani vo ikr mikra. What's the difference, these cases from those cases? But really, the real sources from this pasuk, v'asmachta bi'almo, and all of the other proofs are just asmachta. And we will note over here that even though the Gemara here is saying that the derivations in this brisa are really just an asmachta, they're not the true derivations, still Tosfos do say that we do learn from here that a mamatzino can teach with a mamatzino, since that kind of limud is mentioned in this brisa. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Shiyori Hadam, the remainder of the blood of the inner carbon chatos, is poured to the base of the Mizbeach on the western side of the outer Mizbeach. And the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason Amar Krotz? Because the Pasuk said, El Yesod Mizbach HaOla. It says, El Yesod Mizbach HaOla Asher Pesach Ol Moed. To the base of the outer Mizbeach that's at the entrance of the Ol Moed. That means Zahu Paga Beresha. That means when the Kohen is leaving the Ol Moed, the first side of the Mizbeach that he encounters is the western side of the Mizbeach, the one that he meets first, so to speak, and that's the side of the Mizbeach again where he pours that remainder of the blood to the base of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, El Yesod Mizbach HaOla, the Pasuk says, El Yesod Mizbach HaOla, V'lo Yesod Mizbeach HaPanimi, but not to the base of the inner Mizbeach. We're talking about the outer Mizbeach. El Yesod Mizbach HaOla, and then also the Pasuk says again, El Yesod Mizbach HaOla, Ein Lo Yesod L'Pnimi Atzmo, means there is no base for the inner Mizbeach. And El Yesod Mizbach HaOla, and again it says El Yesod Mizbach HaOla, that means Tain Yesod L'Mizbeach Shel Ola, means give a base to the Mizbeach of the Ola, meaning the outer Mizbeach, meaning the blood is poured. It's talking about pouring the remainder of the blood to the base of the Mizbeach. Oeinu Ela Mizbecha Shel Ola Yehel Yesod. Maybe what the pasuk actually means is that by the outer Mizbeach, by the applications of the blood, by the sprinklings of the blood, it should be in the area where there is a Yesod. Again, the Yesod did not entirely surround the outer Mizbeach, so when we're applying the blood to the corners of the outer Mizbeach, so maybe there we just mean those areas of the Mizbeach where there is a Yesod. Amar Rabbi Yishmael says, Kal v'chomer, we make the following Kal v'chomer. Mashi rayim she'ein mechaprin, just like the remainder of the blood, which is not for an atonement. To unin Yesod, the base is required. So tchilas ola shemechaperes, when it comes to the initial carbon ola, which is an atonement, eino din she'tu'uni Yesod, isn't it logical that it should require the base of the Mizbeach? Amar Rabbi Akiva says, Mashi rayim she'ein mechaprin, vein boin lechapara, just like the remainder of the blood, which is not an atonement, it doesn't come for an atonement. To una Yesod, again, requires the base of the Mizbeach. Tchilas ola, the beginning of the carbon ola, shemechaperes, which is an atonement, uva lechapara, and it comes for an atonement, eino din she'tu'una Yesod. Isn't it logical that it requires the base of the Mizbeach? Imkain, if so, ma Talmud lomer El Yesod Mizbach HaOla, what is the pasuk teaching from El Yesod Mizbach HaOla? Again, it means Tain Yesod leMizbecha Shel Ola, it means give a base for the Mizbeach of the Ola, for the outer Mizbeach, again, pour the blood to the base of the Mizbeach. And Rashi explains, "My time El Yesod Ma'irav." Why is it that it's poured by the base of the western side of the Mizbeach? As we said, Techsib bepar Kohen Mashiach, because it's written by the par of the Kohen Gadol. El Yesod Mizbach Ola Asher Pesach Ol Moed. It says again the pasuk Pesach Ol Moed Yesod Shekeneged HaPesach. It means the base corresponding to the entrance of the Ol Moed, the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash. V'zui Ma'aravo Shel Mizbeach. That refers to the western side of the Mizbeach. Shu Keneged Pesach HaEchel, which again corresponds to the entrance of the Heichel Ulukamon. Bebraisa Nafkul and Par Yom Kippurim. Now later in the Braisa we're going to learn by the Par of Yom Kippur, May Ribuya Dehapar, from the inclusion Dehapar of Hapar, Shaton Matan Dam Liyasod, that it needs application of the blood again to the base of the Mizbeach. Bepar Kohen Mashiach, by the power of the Kohen Gadol Uvisoyer and the Higot, Ksiv V'yoso as Damo, Kasher Oso Ladam Hapar. It says that the blood is done as is done to the Dam Hapar. Al Yesod Mizbach HaOla, it says Al Yesod Mizbach HaOla, and again the Braisa quoted those words a number of times, and so Rashi explains Chamish Parshiyos Hein. There are 5 separate parshas. Bechatos Shel Par Mashiach, there's the Chatos of the Par Kohen Gadol, V'Shel Helim, and the Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibor, Shein Pnimios. Those are the inner carbon chatos. V'Shel Seir Nasi, V'Shel Kivsas Yochid, V'Shel Seiras Yochid, Shein Chitzonos. Then there's also the he-goat of the Nasi. There's the female sheep of the individual and the female goat of the individual, which are outer karbonos. And Rashi continues, B'shtayim hapnimios, in the 2 inner karbanos, uvisor nasi, and also by the higot of the nasi, ksiv b'shvichas shirein el yesod mizbach ha'ola, by the pouring of the remainder, it says that phrase, el yesod mizbach ha'ola. B'shtayim hachitzonos, the 2 outer karbanos, ksiv el yesod mizbeach stam, it just says the yesod of the mizbeach stam, it doesn't say el yesod mizbach ha'ola. The kadarish tana talosa el mizbach ha'ola, and so the tan over here is darshaning the 3 times that it says el yesod mizbach ha'ola, lama pirish hakasav, why is it that the pasuk explains it outright those 3 times? Here's the text in Toras Kohanim. El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola Shel Par Kohen Mashiach V'lo Yesod Mizbeach HaPnimi. Again, by the Par of the Kohen Gadol, it says El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola, and not to the Yesod of the inner Mizbeach. El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola Shel Par Ha'eda. It says El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola by the Par of the community. Shein Talmud Lomar, doesn't have to say that. Ein Lo Yesod L'Pnimi Atzmo. That means there is no Yesod for the inner Mizbeach. And finally, Kishu Omer El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola B'Sir Nasi, when it says El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola by the higot of the Nasi, She'ein Talmud Lomer, the pasuk doesn't need to say that. She'mes Shirav Lo Kivo Mizbeach HaPnimi, because if the inner Mizbeach does not accept the remainder of its own blood, so Shiore Mizbeach HaChitzon Yikabel, do you think that the inner Mizbeach is going to receive the remainder of the blood from applications on the outer Mizbeach? Davar Acher, another explanation, V'chiyesh Lo Yesod L'Pnimi Atzmo, is there a Yesod for the inner Mizbeach? Imkein Ma Talmud Lomer El Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola. Why does the pasuk say El Yesod Yisod Mizbach HaOla. It means Tain Yisod LeMizbech HaShalola. Again, it means give a base for the Mizbeach of the Ola. That's where you pour the remainder of the blood. V'hachanami Ba'inan Tulasa LeMigras. Here also it's going to be 3 times. V'hachi Garsino Nepeirusho Yisod Mizbach HaOla HaOmer B'Par Kohen Mashiach. Again, it says that by the Par Kohen Gadol. V'lo Yisod Mizbeach HaPnimi. Pour it to the outer Mizbeach, not to the base of the inner Mizbeach. Shelo Tomer B'Makom Matan HaKarbanos Shamu Shvicha Shiarav. Maybe one might think that wherever you apply the blood, that's where you pour the remainder. No, that is not the case. Even by the inner chatos, the remainder is poured by the outer mizbeach base. El Yisod Mizbach HaOla HaAmar B'Paro Eda Delo Tzarech Su. Again, El Yisod Mizbach HaOla by the power of the community. You don't need that. To Iska Shlahadadi, because they're compared to one another. El Alil Modba, but again, it's to learn. Shafilu Yisod Ein Lo Lepnimi. There is no Yisod for the inner mizbeach. V'hachi Midrash Ho'olo Miyusar Lidrasha Yisod Yeh LeMizbeach HaOla V'lo Lepnimi. The drasha is that since it's extra, we darshan there's a yesod for the Mizbeach HaOla and not for the Pnimi. And then finally, the last drasha, El Yesod Mizbeach HaOla HaAmor B'Seir Nasi, when it says El Yesod Mizbeach HaOla by the Seir Nasi, She'ein Tam V'Lomer doesn't need to say that. Kidem Mefarish B'Taras Kohanim Behed Yemi Trei Taimi. It's like it says in Taras Kohanim for 2 reasons you don't need to say it. Chadad HaShiari Damim Shel Atzmon Shel Pnimi Kagon B'Par Mashiach Ve'eda Lo Kibel Pnimi. If the remainder of the blood where the applications were done on the inner Mizbeach, the inner Mizbeach doesn't take those remainders. Kida Amron, like we said, Shiyarav Shal Chitzon Yekavel Bitzmiyah. Do you think it's going to accept the remainder of the outer, that which was applied in the outer Mizbeach? V'yod Lamanu Shein Lo Yisod. Plus, we already learned that there is no Yisod of the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Ulakam Monami Hachi Parshin La B'Shmait, and this is how it's going to be explained later in our sugi as well. Mk Matam Alomar Yisod Mizbeach HaOla. Why does it say Yisod Mizbeach HaOla? It means Tain Yisod LeMizbeach Shel Ola. Give a Yisod for the Mizbeach of the Ola. And what does that mean? It means Tain Torah's Shvichas Shirayim Yisod Lehilchos Mizbecha Shel Ola. You have to give the law of the pouring of the remainder to the Yisod, to the laws of the Mizbeach of the Ola, meaning Sheyehei HaMizbeach Ton Ba'ola Uvechol Damim Hanitanan Olav. What the Bryce is trying to say is that the Mizbeach by the Karban Ola, and any time you have blood that's applied to it, it has to be Shvichas Shirayim El HaYisod. You pour the Shirayim to the Yisod. Im Nishar B'Kli Klum, if anything is left in the vessel, Kishazoreg Mimenu Shtei Zrikos L'Shtei Kronos, when you do the Zrika, throw the blood to the 2 corners, Yishbechenu L'Yisod. You have to pour to the Yisod. Now, since it doesn't say this idea of pouring the remainder by the Karban Ola, it's that's why it's learned from here. The Brisa then said, maybe it's teaching us something else, that for the Mizbeach of the Ola there is a Yisod. Maybe it's not teaching us anything about pouring the remainder of the Karban Ola and other bloods. Maybe it's telling us the laws of the Mizbeach by the applications of the blood of the Ola. That you apply the blood corresponding to where the Yisod is. Again, the Yisod did not run around the entirety of the Mizbeach. We would exclude the southeastern corner. She'ein lo Yisod. There's no Yisod there. Like we say in this parak. And the Brisa then continued, Amar Rabbi Yishmael, Mikal v'chomer nafkal anha. Rabbi Yishmael said we can learn this idea from a kal v'chomer v'lo boy kra. His point is we don't need a pasuk as a source. Mashirayim shal chatos shein mechaprin tunin yisod. If the remainder of a chatos, the remainder blood of the chatos, which is not a kapara, requires yisod. Rabbi Akiva gomer lo laha kal v'chomer hachiyu mashirayim. And Rabbi Akiva learns the kal v'chomer in the following manner. Ulekamei mefarish mai beinayu. And the Gemara later will explain what the difference is between them. And what Rashi is referencing is the 2 kal v'chomers in the Brisa. Again, Amr Rabbi Yishmael kal v'chomer. Rabbi Yishmael makes a kal v'chomer. You don't need a pasuk. And then Amr Rabbi Akiva mashirayim. He also has his own limit. And again, the Gemara will address both Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, Al Yisod Mizbach, again it says, Al Yisod Mizbach HaOla, V'lo Yisod Mizbeach HaPnimi, not to the Yisod of the inner Mizbeach. But the Gemara says, Hami Boile Lagufe, isn't the pasuk needed just to teach the simple halach itself? And the Gemara says to that, Me'asher Pesach ol Moed Nafka. No, really, that's already learned. You don't need that part of the pasuk, because you could have learned it from Asher Pesach ol Moed. El Yisod Mizbach HaOla, again it says, El Yisod Mizbach HaOla. And Rashi explains, Haimi Boile Lagufe Sheyishbechem Li Yisod Mizbeach HaChitzon. The pasuk is saying, pour the blood to the outer mizbeach base. But nevertheless, certainly if he wants to, he could do it on the inner mizbeach. Why should we learn out an exclusion? That's the question of the Gemara. Vikashan, if you're going to ask, if you're going to ask, well, didn't we learn in the Brisa there is no yesod anyway for the inner mizbeach? That's just from the extra pasuk. And if you're going to use the first pasuk just for the halach itself, and then the second one for an exclusion, you don't have that other one for an exclusion, that second one, only from the third, then you won't have the third drasha. That's what the Gemara is asking over here. And the Gemara says, no, it is an extra pasuk. It's not mi boile legufe, because me'asher pesach ol moed nafka, it's learned already from pesach ol moed, the hainu chitzon, that already tells us the outer mizbeach. It could have just said, pour it to the base of the mizbeach, that's at the entrance of the old moed. Mizbach ha'ola lamali, why do you need it to say mizbach ha'ola? Lemiyuta, that is for an exclusion, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis.